Well, good evening as people are arriving. My name is Mark Bailey. I'm your host here this evening. I'm being joined obviously by the authors of the books and also Charles Oppenheim, who will be actually kind of introducing each of our speakers this evening. We'll be starting shortly. We're just waiting for a few more attendees to come in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Charles, I think I would like to hand over to yourself. I can see we've got about 50 people have arrived so far. There's a few more. Inevitably, as people click on that join link, they're coming in. So it's lovely to see everybody. To explain, for those who have not attended a Zoom webinar before, we can't see you. I know you can see us, you can hear us. Your microphone systems are all muted at the moment. The idea is that we do that to reduce any extraneous noise, so there's no disturbance from microphones. And pretty obviously, as we go through the next hour, our speakers will be talking to you about the books and showing you extracts from the books. That's the nature of the presentation. So I'm going to hand over to Charles now, and let me just make sure, Charles, that everybody can see you.
Yep.
Okay, over to you, Charles.
Thank you very much, Mark, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is for you in the audience today. And you're very welcome to this presentation from the Royal Philatelic Society London, talking about some of the recently published books that the Royal have been responsible for. And I want to introduce now the first speaker, who is Chris Harman. Chris started collecting at about the age of 6 and has never stopped. He is a past president of the Royal Philatelic Society London, an honorary fellow of the society, and he's been involved with its expert committee since the mid-1980s and is currently its chairman of the expert committee. He's also a signatory of the Roll of Distinguished Philatelists and is currently chairman of its board of election. He collects a bit of everything, but today we'll be talking to you about the book that have been recently published on the Ceylon pence issues. So it's now over to you, Chris.
Over to you, Chris. If you'd like to begin. Yeah.
Trying to share.
Indeed.
Right. I say.
Yeah, do you want to click on that thing there to maximize the screen?
Is that good enough? There we are.
That's lovely.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This book must be one of the longest gestation periods for any book, philatelic book. It dates originally back to the 1970s, when one of the two authors, Patrick Pearson, who had at that stage a very fine collection of Ceylon, started researching through the archives of Perkins Bacon and the archives of De La Rue to look at the history of the stamps. And it lay fallow for many years until Kurt Kimmel, the other author, and owner of probably the finest collection of Ceylon that has been put together for many, many years, took it up and produced it to its current state. My involvement was basically a request from Patrick and Kurt to edit the book as it evolved. Patrick's early drafts were really not in current format, and Kurt Kimmel felt that his English needed quite a lot of tidying up. It didn't actually need a great deal of tidying up, but anyway, I got the job of doing that. I have had an interest in Ceylon for really quite a few years. To me, it is one of the great classic collecting countries of the world. The first stamps were printed by Perkins Bacon. There were 11 different values, the most different values of any of the British Empire countries. It was also one of the earliest. The first stamps were issued in 1855. It had stationery that came in very soon after that, which is one of the two countries in the British Empire, together with Mauritius, that issued stationery. It had revenues within this period, and again, they were issued more or less concurrently with the postage stamps. It is a country with, I think, everything that a collector can, that excites the collector, because of its position as one of the crossroads south of India for communication between Australia and through to Europe, across originally the overland route at the top of the Red Sea and eventually the Suez Canal. It was had a lot of activity through it and had vast numbers of stamps that were used. It had regular 6-monthly deliveries of stamps from London, and which means actually that most of these stamps are highly collectible in terms of actually being quite common. They are, to me, very attractive in their engraved, most of them engraved stamps in this early period. And it also has the advantage of having not only common stamps, but some of the great rarities of the world as well. So it's got a bit of everything. It's got the postal history because of the crossroads nature of the colony, and it's got very attractive stamps which can be, say, for varying pockets. It's also a country that where until now there has not been a book on the stamps. The last attempt to catalogue the Ceylon stamps was the book on British Asia, published by the Royal Philatelic Society, or the Philatelic Society London as it was in those days, in the 1890s. And so it was one of the great holes in books on classic countries. And there's long been a need for something to cover this. There's books on postal history, but there have never been books on the stamps themselves. Kurt Kimmel has over many, many years assembled what, as I mentioned, was probably the greatest collection of these. Maybe not the biggest, but certainly in terms of picked items, it's got some extremely important, it's got all the important things in it. The book covers the stamps value by value. That was thought probably to be the best way of doing it. And it takes the value and it evolves it from its early proofs and essays through to the issued stamps and the usage of those stamps, and items like elements of rarity, different colors, different perforations, etc. So an extensive index there. To me, they are most attractive stamps, and when you see them in blocks like this, which are not easy, they really do shine. The one on the left is actually a discovery of Kurt Kimmel, which was, there were 2 plates of the penny, the first penny, and we are showing there the how one distinguishes one plate from the other. On the right-hand page, it's got one major rarity, which is a single usage of the 2p stamp. The 2p stamp, in theory, was the next weight upwards above ½ ounce, used locally within Ceylon, but there are virtually no covers. There's probably a handful of covers known in the world. The 10p stamp and the usage of that. rather unusually, quite early on, Ceylon ordered a halfpenny stamp, which was for newspapers and printed papers, and they ordered this from De La Rue and not Perkins Bacon. So they had actually two printers running concurrently, delivering stamps to them. The halfpenny used on a single cover like this is a significant rarity. For printed paper and newspapers, as you can imagine, the survival rate is very low indeed. In 1859, they ordered a new series of different values, which came in octagonal format, and some of the great rarities for Ceylon occur on these higher values: the 8pence, the 9pence. On the left are plate proofs. The 8pence and 9pence, in fact, surprisingly rare as plate proofs. There's virtually no multiples known, while others are quite common. As with many other colonies, the Perkins Bacon lost the contract to print Ceylon stamps in 1862, and the whole contract and the plates were taken over by De La Rue. And on the right, you see the 2-shilling De La Rue used on cover and an unused block from the Kimmel collection. As I mentioned, they had stationery very early in the stationery was issued in 1858. The penny envelope is relatively common, but uprated, as you see below, with the 4penny, first imperforate 4penny. This is a world rarity. It is the only known stationery cover uprated with the 4penny, which is itself one of the rare stamps of Ceylon. And and on the other side you have the 9pence, which is one of the covers that is seen more often, but seen more often means there's still only a handful in existence. The revenue stamps, which were issued at the same time as the postage stamps, were printed in multiple value sheets. These are the foreign bill. They were printed in the same ink as was the first 6penny, and there were two types with two different inscriptions, one of which was never used. We don't quite know why, but it was never used, and it is recorded that all examples were destroyed. The plate format is very strange, with sometimes about a dozen values within the same sheet. Here, looking at the book, you have, after dealing with the stamps themselves, you have the postal history, and this is looking at the transit routes. One of the interesting things, and one of the first things that drew me to Ceylon, in fact, was that you get these printers' samples, which date to about 1900 to 1935, were done by Perkins Bacon, and most attractive. Quite where they fit into the history, I don't know, but they are very attractive, and there's some examples there on the left. And on the right, you get some forgeries. These are forgeries done by George Kirk Jeffreys. They are hand engraved, and there's some examples there of the finished forgery and some reprinted examples from the original plates. The tables at the back of this book give a detailed assessment of the printing records and delivery records. Appendix 3, you'll see, is the Perkins Bacon delivery records in date order, and thereafter there is analysed by value order. So the right-hand one showing there is the deliveries and printings of the 4pence stamp, and so you have a detailed reference from the archives there. One of the things this book brings you is an extensive bibliography, not only the very few books that are on Ceylon, but the articles, most of which appeared in the London Philatelist. So a detailed look at those, and most interestingly, auction catalogues. You can trace back some of the great names among the philatelists of the past that have collected Ceylon. and they're all listed there and extensively quoted from in the text. This is a rarity table. The one on the right, I think, is interesting. The right-hand column of the right one is those rarities that are in the Kimmel collection, and as you can see, it is virtually complete as compared with all the other great collections, including the Queen's collection, including Joseph Hackney, including Anthony de Worms, an amazing assembly. So I think this book has got a very, very full analysis of what you can do in Salon. And if you haven't bought one yet, I would highly recommend it. Very attractive and beautiful illustrations of some wonderful items. Thank you very much, and questions welcomed.
Thank you very much, Chris. If anybody has questions about the content of the book or the book itself, if you could put those into the Q&A, which is at the bottom of your screen, we can then handle those. So does anybody have any questions for Chris? And indeed, there's a message saying, please pop all questions in the Q&A.
No questions yet.
No questions yet. We have an audience of above 80. I think you may have stunned them into silence, Chris.
Well, they'll have to buy the book to answer their questions, I think, is probably the answer, isn't it?
I was just about to suggest that. Failure to ask a question, the penalty is go to the Royals booth at Stampex, and you will find links there to the books, and you can certainly purchase one. But hello, we do have a question. Let's have a look at this. And this is from John Hicklin. The Kimmel book raises many ambiguities regarding colour. Is any research continuing to clarify those questions?
Ambiguities regarding colour. The stamps illustrated and the colour analysis has been done extremely carefully with the Gibbons colour guides. So some of the colours are quite difficult to tell apart. You need a number of these stamps to know the differences from time to time. But fundamentally, there has been one source that has been used in terms of colour description. And as we know, ambiguities on colour are legion, but when compared with a single source, I think we have established a fairly reliable methodology for measuring them.
Thank you, Chris. We don't have any other questions at the moment. So what I would propose then is, thank you very much, Chris. And we'll now move on to our next speaker. And our second speaker is John Davies. John is a fellow of and a member of the council of the Royal Philatelic Society London. He's also president of the GB Philatelic Society and is on the executive committee of the Association of British Philatelic Societies. He founded Stamp Active, that wonderful organisation that promotes philately to young people. John's main collecting interest is the 1890 penny postage Jubilee. He has received large gold for his collection based on this series of events. And this collection is, of course, the basis of his recently published book, or the Royals' recently published book, but John is the author. And so I will now pass over to John and ask you, John, to talk about the 1890 penny postage Jubilee and your book about it.
Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us. The purpose of this presentation is really just to give you a flavour for some of the material covered by my book. In just a few minutes we've got, it's impossible to cover everything, but here goes. The Jubilee Reminiscence tells the story of the Victorian celebration of the introduction of uniform penny postage and, of course, the world's first stamp, the penny black. After 50 years, the Victorians regarded it as a huge success, and they felt it had brought great benefits in terms of trade, in terms of education, in terms of general social contact. And so various people wanted to do something to celebrate this great event. My personal interest in this begins in 1990, when I went along to Stamp World London 90, the big 10-year international, to launch Stamp Active. And in the catalogue, and you could buy souvenirs of the reproduction of Britain's first commemorative postal stationery, the Guildhall letter card and the Jubilee envelope. And I mistakenly bought one of the original envelopes and sent it to myself as a souvenir. And now, 30 years later, there's 30 years of study that have been brought together in this new book. The actual planning for this began a year earlier, when the Post Office formed a committee and asked De La Rue to produce some essays for what would have been the first commemorative postage stamp, and 11 essays were produced. The one in the middle here, which I've highlighted, is marked up the best, I think, by J.S. Purcell, who was controller of stamps at the Inland Revenue. But in the end, the Post Office decided not to proceed with it, and all the essays are described in the book. And they also put together a conversazione, which was a bit of a trial run for the events to follow. But the year actually began with a Post Office dinner at the Holborn restaurant in London, attended by 300 senior officials, including the Postmaster General and many others. And interestingly, the place card for the dinner was actually a reprint of the Mulready design, which was quite an attractive item to have. But the big event was a 3-day exhibition held at the Guildhall in London. Held over 3 days. It was attended by the Prince of Wales, 20,000 people. It led to the first introduction of Britain's first commemorative postal stationery, as I've said, and also the first British decorative hand stamps, and all sorts of things could be seen by visitors. The architect's plan on the right there shows how mail coaches came into the yard, unloaded their mail, went into the Guildhall to be sorted and stamped. There were telegraphic displays and many more things, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail. One of my favourite items is the invitation card for the opening night. It has as its centrepiece a re-engraved VR penny black with the letters JL in the corners for Jubilee London. And this was attached to a coupon which you gave up on entry, but it was expected that you retained the big card as a memento of the event. And plate proofs do exist of the penny black. Also, many different types of displays could be seen in the Guildhall. The Illustrated London News on the right is showing you there, the sort of bottom left, the 1790 Post Office, but you could also see the new invention of the Edison phonograph, listen to programs of music, see exhibits of postal history and stamps, many, lots of different things that were part of this exhibition. And one of the highlights, were displays of stamps, and the Guildhall Proofs are really the gems of any 1890 collection. There are various issues that were reprinted: the old original die 1, the die 2, the die 3 penny, the halfpenny, the penny halfpenny, and the tuppence. If any of you have got any of these, I'd love to know about them, because they're very, very rarely seen. In fact, the two on the top right, the tuppence and the penny halfpenny, are scans from the Royal collection. It's the only time that I've seen them. As I say, the Guildhall Exhibition has had so many things going on, and there are so many bits of postal history and also ephemera that you can collect. Tickets, carriage passes, the Guildhall badge for the committee, which was an enamelled badge of the penny lilac, and all bits of postal history. The bottom right is actually a letter written to the Prince of Wales that's initialed in the corner HCR. HCR was Henry Cecil Raikes, the Postmaster General, and is rather a nice thing to have found. How it ever escaped, goodness only knows. Other items include, as I say, the telegraphs. There was a British Army post office with a special cachet, BAE. The piece in the middle is actually an envelope written to Constance Hill by W.H. Preece. Constance Hill was Rowland Hill's niece, and W.H. Preece was the chief electrician to the post office, and he had sent Constance some telegraphic tape from the exhibition. Again, the only example that I've come across so far. But all sorts of postal history displays, as I say, Edison's phonograph, and these are all things that you can pick up that tell the story of this celebration. One of the features of the show was the first ever commemorative postal stationery, and this was the Guildhall letter card. It was printed by De La Rue. They printed 10,000 and they sold out on the opening night in less than 3 hours. They managed to get De La Rue to print another 1,500 during the show, but again, there was certainly a much greater demand than that. And they produced a little flyer that they gave out in the 1790 post office to promote it. In fact, they obviously didn't need to do that. They sold out so quickly. And also the first decorative hand stamp, the Guildhall Star. Again, this comes in two forms. There's a rubber hand stamp and a metal hand stamp. The metal hand stamp was intended to be applied on postal items, and it actually has a code in the centerpiece which is indicating the hour that it was processed in the post office. One of the great rarities of these postmarks is actually this circular hand stamp, which I've never come across on a postal item. This is a proof, and I've only ever seen it in a proof, but it may have been used on parcels, but even now we're not quite certain about that. Immediately the Guildhall exhibition closed, the new exhibition opened in the Portman Rooms in London, hosted by the Philatelic Society of London, now of course the Royal. And again, this was a royal event. The Prince of Wales had opened the Guildhall, and at this one it was attended and opened by the Duke of Edinburgh, who became the president of the Royal later that year. Again, one of the features of that exhibition was Britain's first Cinderella item, with the Mauritius overprints LPE 1890 on the stamps, again, which you could buy. The official post office event was held on the 2nd of July. It was only one evening. It didn't open until 7 o'clock at night, but again, it had many of the features that had been seen at the Guildhall. You can see on the photograph at the bottom the 1790 post office and the booth where you could buy various items. Again, all sorts of posters, tickets and stuff exist for this. but surprisingly, despite the fact it was only for one evening, again, all of the things that you saw at the Guildhall in terms of the handling of mail, being stamped and sorted and so forth, happened. But there were some additional features there. There was a pneumatic tube post. There was an electrophonoscope. And this item here is one of the special cards that was used on the pneumatic tube post, because you could send a message down the tube, ask a question, and get a reply. And the electrophonoscope, again, this is a press release over here, that was saying it was going to be one of the wonders of the age. It was effectively a precursor to a video call, but it was only when the autobiography of Priest was actually published that he actually said it wasn't anything electronic at all. It was all done simply by a sequence of mirrors. But I wonder what it'd make now of us doing all of this on a computer. It'd be quite a shock to the system, I should think. This time, again, a whole series of hand stamps. The circular Guild Exhibition hand stamp was again on mail. A lot of these events were actually charity events in aid of the Roland Hill Benevolent Fund. I didn't mention earlier, the Guildhall letter card was actually sold at 6p for the benefit of the fund. And again, these hand stamps could be applied purely on items by favour on payment of a penny to raise money for the fund. But this time, not only did you have the, if you like, the exhibition hand stamp, you could get a cachet for the 1790 post office, a cachet for a 1990 post office. Again, this was one of the things they were trying to do to show what future postal services might be like in 100 years' time. And one of the attractions was that it was lit by electric light. And again, you had cachets for the pneumatic tube post. You paid a penny for that to send it down the wire, but if you wanted it to come back, you had to pay another 3p. Again, this is a set of proofs from the post office, but there are some interesting items that can be found, including usages of the hand stamps in the wrong colours. The Guildhall letter card had been such a success that the post office, at the very last minute, thought they ought to do something special for themselves for their own event, and they didn't feel that they could have another letter card, so they decided to have an envelope. And what's detailed in the book is the story from the original hand pen and ink sketch that was done by Baines, who was secretary to the committee, right through to the finished proof. Again, not time to go through all of that, but it's quite an interesting story and quite remarkable that from the 19th of May till the 2nd of July, they managed to design and print and circulate 250,000 of these envelopes. Other things that are detailed in the book include the story of the Elliot imitation of the Jubilee envelope. This was issued only a couple of days after the Jubilee event, but in reality, there was more to that story that we're still finding out about. So it's quite an interesting thing to investigate. There was also a caricature produced by Harry Finesse, who was the cartoonist for Punch. And again, quite a story behind that. There was a Christmas card and even a medal to celebrate uniform penny postage. The one that's shown here actually has a mistake on the proof because they've spelt system with an I instead of a Y. So there's lots of this story. And of course, it's all in the book. I'd like to thank everyone who contributed to the research and to scans of the material, and has helped and encouraged and supported this book so far. Whatever you're interested in, whether it's stamps, postal history, Cinderella stamps, forgeries, Christmas cards, coins, hopefully there'd be a little bit of something for everyone. So I hope you all enjoy it.
Thank you very much, John. we now have a few minutes for questions for John regarding the Jubilee or regarding the book, or regarding the book. So if anybody's got any questions, as I'd like to put them into the Q&A, now is the time.
Actually, Charles, there seems to be a question that's come in the chat at the moment. So may I read that out?
Yes, do.
Okay, John, the question is as follows. And I'm sorry, I don't know who it's from, but let me just see. I can see who it's from. It's, oh, sorry, I do apologize. It's from Andrew Lamprecht, who asks, John, you illustrated but did not talk about the book issued soon after about the event. Surely this is an unusually quick response to an event of its sort. Can you say a little bit about the book, please?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, you're right. There was an illustration of a red book, red and gilt book, and this was a book that the post office issued in 1891 that brought together many of the details of what happened, going through from, you can actually, if you want to, read the speeches that were at the dinner. You can see the instructions for duty that were printed by the post office. You can see extracts of the some of the newspaper reports of the time. I've tried not to repeat a lot of that in the book. Obviously, some of it is has some of the same content, but generally I've tried not to repeat the basic things that are in my book and focus on the philatelic side of things. But yes, you're quite right. It's a very good read and very good value for money if you can pick one up secondhand.
Thank you very much, John. We now do have some further questions in the Q&A, so I'm now going to run through them. One from Joe: is the RPSL offering any Stampex discount on publication, even postage packing, perhaps? I think I can answer that. This was raised as a possibility, but it was decided that no, there wouldn't be any particular discount for Stampex, even though there was a discount scheme earlier during August, which was very successful. So I wouldn't dismiss the possibility of the Royal offering special discounts in the future, but for Stampex itself, right now, I don't believe there is any such discount. Adrian has a question. How does the Jubilee relate to the Royal Naval Exhibition and the Gardening and Forestry Exhibition? I know nothing about it, but I presume you do, John. I seem to think I have seen the Jubilee cancellation on the Royal Naval Exhibition.
That's right. I don't know anything specific about those exhibitions, but of course, there is a connection in the sense that they did also have decorative hand stamps, and of course the uniform penny postage, if you like, Jubilee exhibition was the first of those kind of things. But in terms of what those events celebrated and what was involved, I'm afraid that might be a new collecting area for me to start now that I've got on with this one.
Oh, there's a challenge.
There's a challenge. Absolutely.
Colin asked, how difficult is it to find related materials on the open market today?
It's not difficult at all. The basic material is quite common. As I say, there were 250,000 Jubilee envelopes printed, and they were sent all over the world. In fact, I was looking on eBay earlier. There's a few bits and pieces around at the moment, but also, of course, stamp dealers have plenty of these items. But it's wrong to single perhaps too many out, but people like Bill Bowell and Andrew Lager have some good material amongst their stock, I'm sure.
Thank you, John. Graham Winters asks, how well do you think this lends itself to open philately?
Well, that's my area, as obviously, because in open philately you can include in your exhibit up to 50% of the material as all sorts of ephemera, coins, and for me, open philately brings a collection to life, because you can illustrate things very well in terms of the story, when you've got a few extra bits and pieces as well.
Yeah. Okay. And one further question, which is from David Rennie. So this isn't actually a question, but I would just like to say that my full-page review of the book has just appeared in the Philatelic Exporter and should also appear in Gibbon Stamp Monthly. One of the most entertaining books I have reviewed for a long time. I hope it sells well.
Oh, that's very kind of you. I'm glad it got a good review. Is all I can say. It's all I can say. Thank you very much for that. It's much appreciated.
Very good. Well, thank you very much indeed. We're now going to go on to our final speaker for today, who is Jamie Gough. He describes himself as a philatelic enthusiast. He's won 3 USA Nationals titles, starting in 1973, and 3 international Grand Prix. Earlier this year, Jamie was honored with the American Lough Award for Research. This is USA's highest honor for a living philatelist. As well as being a fellow of the Royal Philatelic Society London, he was elected to the role of Distinguished Philatelist in 2012. Subject of his presentation today is the first 2 volumes of his RPSL book, The Postal History of the UPU. These have already won the RPSL's Crawford Medal for Best Book of the Year for 2020. So, over to you, Jamie.
Thank you, Charles. Is my presentation showing on your screens?
Yes,
Yeah.
Jamie, and you're going to click on that green button again, yeah?
Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me.
No worries. Over to you.
Okay, here it is. Thank you all for attending this presentation on the UPU, the postal history of the UPU. The first 2 volumes of this series is on the postal card worldwide. What, just for fun, here's a snapshot of one of the dust covers showing some of the material that is contained in the book. The book has lots of illustrations and descriptions, which makes it really easy to look at. But let's look at some of the background on the UPU book, the when, what, and why. I've been working on UPU for over 40 years, and I'd been developing a book when in 2012, at a meeting in Perth of the Great Britain Philatelic Society, I was asked to give a presentation. And I was trying to think, what could I put into a small enough subject matter that would be interesting, because a lot of the people in the audience are very well-known philatelists who know a lot about philately. So I gave the one on the postal card. I was asked by the editor of the LP, Frank Walton, if I would write an article for the LP. But as I started writing that, it grew too large to be an article, even if spread over several issues. And we started talking about a monograph. And from the monograph, we started talking about a book. And then I said, well, let's just fold it into the broader topic, the postal history of the UPU. But at this point, many of you are probably sitting there and going, the postal card, 2 volumes, 1,000 pages? You've got to be kidding. But for those of you who are, very suspicious that 1,000 pages were warranted, I ask you to look at the table of contents which the Royal Philatelic Society of London has on its website. After you read the 6 pages of the table of contents, you might have a good idea that this topic is fully legitimate for almost 1,000 pages. One of the things that I've noticed over time in working on the UPU is its ability to manage change so well. And when you think about that, the fact that it's a government organization, that almost no one in the world has to think about it because it does such a good job. The book also contains contributors lists because I had a lot of help from people around the world. When I've been judging, I would see interesting items, I'd make a note, it went into my filing system, and I ended up reaching out to a lot of people to help me by providing scans of material or background information, etc. So contributors were really important, and there's over 250 of them referenced in the book. And lastly, postal cards, I believe, are really undervalued by the philatelic mainstream. But before we move on, UPU, you know, when you start talking rules, regulations, and rates, is very complex. But it's just not complex in the sense of those rules and regulations and rates, but it's complex when you begin to understand it in context of its time and place. So I start off with a terminology and framework for understanding, which I really encourage everybody to read and understand before moving on in the book, so the comprehension level will be vastly improved. The book has lots of illustrations. Here on one of the page are the world's first postal cards issued the same day by Austria and Hungary. And here it is, Austria in German, Hungary in German, and over here on the right side is you have the Hungarian card issued on that day in Hungarian, and all three of these are first day usages. But what really makes this world's first issue of postal cards fascinating to me is the post office ended up putting a message on the bottom of all the postal cards in German or in Hungarian that said that the post office is not responsible for the content of the message, which I find incredibly funny because Russia and Austria-Hungary were the only two countries that thought to warn the public about their post offices not being responsible. And that, to me, is fascinating considering they were autocratic empires. The book is full of historical documents, just for a sense of context and being able to tie to the time and events. And over here is one shown for one of the agreements between Italy and the British Empire about mails being routed through Italy from Europe to and from Australasia. And a lot of people don't know about this, and this is perhaps one of those interesting tidbits that most postal historians will find fascinating. I ended up separating some of the information so the narratives didn't get too long and too boring. And one of the first things I did was to create the blue box. And the blue box is for contextual information. So if you're reading about the postal card and some of the challenges being faced, I give you special information so you don't have to go on the internet and find it yourself, if in fact you can find it on the internet. Here I talk about currency conversion on another side. And this postal card here shows a Norwegian mixed currency between øre and skilling to pay the rate in the new øre era. And this is supposedly, during the 6-month period, the only postal card known going to Norway from Denmark at that rate. Another form of boxes are yellow boxes, and this is largely tabular information. So you get a lot of rate information throughout the book. Here we provide some volume information so you can understand rarity or scarcity of postal cards going to different destinations. And bear in mind that in the period of the UPU, mail volumes tend to be reciprocal. So in this instance, in 1872, German postal cards going to Italy were about 6. And so you could guess pretty well that coming from Italy to Germany at that point was probably 0 because Italy did not yet issue a postal card. But at least at this point, you know that the Germans were sending postal cards to Italy. Yellow boxes continued, other types of tabular information. A lot of collectors don't realize that rules and regulations and rates got changed between Congresses, not just at Congresses. So these were done by mail votes, and many of these mail votes never made it into the congressional document, into the documents of the various congresses. So sometimes I get collectors who are really shocked when I tell them that color coding started in 1879 and only was recorded in the Washington Congress Convention in 1897. Some people say, no, it can't have been a rule because, you know, the documents were complete, but the fact of the matter is they weren't. Over here we have green boxes, and green boxes are in many cases the transcription of specific informations of an archival nature. And in this case, this is the letter from the General Post Office London that was sent out to Jamaica and several other colonies all at the same time. It's rather lengthy, but Steve Jarvis of the United Kingdom sat at the archives at Kew and typed this out because he couldn't get a clear enough copy of it to include in the book. And Steve's just one of the many collectors who dove in to help in the completion of this book. Footnotes. Footnotes are not always just references on where the information came from. Sometimes it's an embellishment of information that didn't quite justify a yellow or a green box. And so here in this instance, footnote 55 in this chapter shows how many specimen stamps the German post office was holding it in 1875 at its postal museum. Here's more information on the cost of traveling by train across the Panama Isthmus or across the United States and other little details. So do not skip footnotes, and they tend to be on the page that they're referencing. Here's some interesting aspects of postal cards now that I've told you about how the information's laid out. You probably have all seen postal cards from the 1800s where it says address only to be written on this side. Well, in this instance, we have Guatemala's first postal card. It's written in the handwriting of someone who went to a German school, which could have been in Guatemala by this time. And what's interesting is here you have the address, and here you have the message, because the sender didn't realize that the message should have gone on the backside. That was not a rare problem worldwide. Not common, but certainly not rare. Over here, you have Canadian postal cards being used in Great Britain, even though at the time, Canada forbade the use of any foreign postal cards in their country unless they were all paid at the letter rate. But in this instance, this was the letter rate in Great Britain. It bears a communication in the nature of true correspondence, which is the terminology the UPU uses. But down here, this was a printed notice, which got to go at the printed matter rate of a halfpenny. And so these kinds of uses of other cards in other members of the, or in this instance, Canada was not a member. The UPU was not yet formed in 1873, but this shows you some of the things that went on when it comes to postal cards being used abroad. In this instance, we have America's first postal card being posted in Hawaii. And what had happened was New York state law required corporations to file their annual reports and mail them to all the shareholders on the same day. They did a bulk mailing to Hawaii and dispatched them there. Over here, we have the whole issue of the India exemption on postal cards, which some of the colonies took. They didn't want to issue postal cards and were able to do so until 1879. UPU indicium on formula cards sold with stamps. We see the example here from Hong Kong until the permanent cards could arrive. And one of the great anomalies of UPU postal rules in this period is you were not allowed to attach anything to a postal card. However, if the object were larger than the postal card, you could attach it and its franking would be acceptable. So to finish up my presentation, we've had a lot of contributors, and I'm very thankful to all these people responding to my requests. In some cases, auction houses went back to owners of material in order to provide it for me. Dealers have done the same thing. We've had 3 people who've done independent research to contribute to the book: Lars Engelbrecht of Denmark, Steve Jarvis of the UK, and Mike Smith of the UK. I'm especially thankful to the Royal Philatelic Society London, because if they had not indicated to me that they wanted me to write the book and publish it, I probably wouldn't have. I wouldn't have gotten around to it. With that, Brian Trotter, I owe a lot of thanks to for working with me on the beautiful layout and for cheerleading at times when I really was losing interest, and he cajoled me. Chris Harman for editing, general advisory, and constant pressure for getting the book going. And then Jonas Hellström of Sweden for ongoing pressure to get the book done. So I owe all of these people great thanks for their help. And now, any brief questions?
Thank you very much, Jamie. Do we have any questions for Jamie?
Well, it looks like I'm getting off easy.
You might be.
Charles,
Yep.
I'm getting a message here that John would like to ask. Oh, okay. Sorry, no, I misread something. Sorry. Disregard my comment for a second. Sorry.
Sure. Okay, we've got some questions. Adrian asks, this is for Jamie, is there anything specific on illustrated cards? I collect 19th century illustrated cards.
Well, within a UPU context, illustrated cards on the front were permitted after the Congress of Washington, 1897. So that's when you start to see them on the front, when they created the rule that allows for bifurcated message sign. Before that, the rules were all pretty much domestically driven by country as to whether or not there could be an illustration on the back.
Thank you. Is that actually discussed in your book?
Yes.
Right.
By Congress.
Steve Jarvis asked the obvious question, how long before the next volumes?
Subtle, subtle, subtle.
Is it a matter of days or just weeks?
It's a matter of a few months. I've dated the page in the front for January 2021.
Right. Excellent. And that'll be the remaining volumes.
Yeah, and I'm expecting 3.
Right. And Louis asks, did you find any particular country that was difficult to find documentation for?
You know, I built up such a contact list of experts in virtually every country that when I reached out to any of them for the information, they were pretty good about getting it or supplying what they had. I did have one British colony, though, where the 4 people that own 98% of all the material were non-responsive and not interested. And I can understand why that's the case, but I still found enough information from other sources.
Okay. And a question from Graham Winters. Do you have anything to do with the vast number of UPU stamps? I'm not quite sure what that question means, but maybe you know.
I actually don't. I'd have to guess. Are you asking me if the book actually talks about the various topical stamps issued for UPU?
That's my interpretation of Graham's question, yes.
Okay. I don't do a compendium of those because they get really numerous. What I do is talk about the evolution of where, you know, the first country to really acknowledge UPU and its cancels was at the Congress of Vienna, 1891. People sometimes think Paris 78 was the first, but that's not true. The Council had really only an incidental relationship to the UPU Congress. It had everything to do with the World's Fair then being held in Paris. So Paris is the first one that had cancels and registration labels. Washington overprinted existing US stamps and handed them out. But it was Rome that started to kick in with illustrated cards. And then it was Madrid 1920 where they actually issued stamps to commemorate the UPU Congress concurrently. And since then, it's been a UPU rule that whoever hosts the Congress has to also issue stamps to honor the UPU.
Ah, okay. Interesting. I now, thank you very much. I haven't got any more questions for you, Jamie, but I want to go back to a question regarding the Salon pence issues, which was asked by Graham Winters. And he asks, is Kurt's collection going to be accessible to view? And do you know when and where and how?
The answer is I very much hope so, but I don't know the when and how or the where. It is a remarkable collection. Parts of it have been shown competitively in exhibitions, but not the most powerful parts. I will certainly be working on Kurt to allow us to sit, because it is well worth seeing.
Thank you, Chris.
Charles, I think John has a contribution to make at this point.
John, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I just wanted to tell you that Kurt Kimmel's collection of 128 pages will be one of the first standing displays at the Royal Philatelic Society in London when it's open again.
All right, that's good to know.
So look out for that.
So we should look out for announcements, certainly.
Yeah.
Okay, I would like to thank our speakers, but I now want to turn to Richard Stock, who is president of the Royal Philatelic Society London, who will do a formal vote of thanks. So over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much indeed, Charles. Good evening, everybody, or good day, wherever you are. I think we've had the opportunity this evening to see three overwhelmingly brilliant presentations of exceptional publications. They represent three totally different aspects of philately and postal history. And to take the first one, the Ceylon book, which is based upon the contents of Patrick Pearson's and Kurt Kimmel's collections. Anyone who's seen Kurt's or part of Kurt's collection will realize just how magnificent it is. And editing a work that is based upon someone else's collection is never anything less than a challenge. And I think that Chris has done a magnificent job in not only doing that and producing editing the book that's been published, but also in presenting the essential, rare and overwhelmingly interesting parts of it to everybody today. The second publication, the 1890 Jubilee of the Penny Black, moves on to a totally different aspect of philately or postal history. And I smiled when the question was received about it being in open philately, because it is so wide. Sections of it could be included in any aspect of philately. It is a subject which contains proofs, commemorative envelopes, hand stamps, imitations, and I cast my mind back when we got to the stage of imitations that I was offered, or I saw on a dealer's table many years ago, a used furnace caricature. Now, I'd seen the mint ones previously, and I'd not previously seen a used one, and I purchased it for what would now be regarded as a ridiculous sum. And then somebody else who wanted it even more than I did some years later made me an offer that I couldn't refuse. And I thought, well, some of these items that are produced as commemorative items, particularly where the furnished caricature is particularly interesting, and I've never seen anybody see one who doesn't smile about it. A used one is not produced in any sort of quantity. The whole subject is dealt with in the most interesting way, and the book is a fascinating read. And John, thank you very much indeed for the way in which you presented it. And the contents are absolutely brilliant to anybody who's interested in any aspect of philately or postal history. And then moving on to Jamie's 2-volume publication of the postal history of the UPU, the postal card. I'm delighted to say that it was a great privilege as being part of the team that awarded this particular publication the Crawford Medal. One of the things that I think was outstanding was the method of research that he adopted in methodically securing items of information from collections he had seen, people he had talked to, and recording it so that he could then go back later to include it in the publication that he was working on. I think, Jamie, your very methodical approach to structure and content of the book can only be admired. The whole publication is divided into discrete chapters which deal with particular aspects of the postal card. The contextual information, the tabular and volume information, the foreign postal card used domestically. And I thought, yes, I've got items in my own collections where there are postal cards used in that way. A Zanzibar card used by a soldier during the Anglo-Boer War in South Africa. And then attachments, tinsel on cards, anything attached to it, those that opened out at the front. And then you had a whole series of mini cards or messages, infringe the postal regulations of so many different countries. And you have collated all this information by country and recorded it. I'm almost speechless that it is so well done and a magnificent publication that should be in anybody's philatelic library. Everybody, all three of you, may I take this opportunity on behalf of the Society to congratulate you for producing the books, publishing them through the Royal, and also for the superb presentations that you have done this evening. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Richard. That